How did I get interested in photography?
Yeah.
I got interested in photography from through through my 18-year-old bagpipe instructor when I was 10.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
What did your bagpipe instructor?
Well, I wanted to photograph her. I wanted to preserve her somewhere. So, and so that was my first foray into photography, taking copious amounts of pictures of my 18-year-old bagpipe instructor, and that's what got me interested, I guess, in photography initially, and then afterwards. So I guess it was always something that I was curious about, and what really probably started everything was, was going to school and discovering, through the library, through poking around, discovering the work of photographers that I felt some kind of connection to or response to, and realizing that, maybe photos wasn't just about taking pictures of your bagpipe instructor. So that's what got me interested. Having a friend who was doing photo at the time and taught me things, and probably ultimately discovering the work of Robert Frank as a kid, and Well, I never decided I wanted to do it for a living. A living never seemed possible, but I spent about 3 years taking pictures infrequently, and while I was studying, and in what would have been my 4th year university, I took the year off, and to figure out what I wanted to do. And not knowing exactly what that was, I spent the first term, what would have been my first term, reading a lot. And the second term I went to Newfoundland for what was supposed to be a week in the middle of winter, and ended up spending 6 weeks there. And when I came back with 65 rolls of film, most of which I've never printed. And it felt really good, not to come back with that film necessarily, but to have been photographing continuously for that period of time. And when I got back, I just felt like, I remember saying to, I think Thaddeus at the time, there's no turning back now. I think I know what I want to do, and it feels kind of good, And that was probably the moment. And then everything after that, everything moved kind of rapidly once I decided that this was something I wanted to pursue, and that I could do it on my own time. Well, certain other doors just closed, and that one opened, and decisions were made easy, in a sense. So, but that was the moment, followed by many other moments, probably. So, I guess I stayed in Sackville because it allows me the freedom to be out of Sackville a lot. I have access to a wonderful dark room where I can get a lot of work done without distraction, and it's the Maritimes. I'm from the Maritimes, and it's there's a sense of home here, and I don't think I could stay in Sackville if I was in Sackville 12 months of the year, but knowing that I'm here for half of that, I like Sackville. No more than I like any other place, but I suppose if I could, I would live in, Florida or somewhere if it was easier. I've used photography as a convenient excuse for my own desire to be kind of on the move. And I think if I wasn't taking pictures, I'd probably travel a lot, but this puts, justification on it from my point of view, and it enables me to be in a place in ways in which I wouldn't be if I wasn't photographing, But I don't think you have to go anywhere to photograph, and I'm not so sure if like the whole outsider. I'm not sure how I feel about the notion of looking at a place from an outsider's point of view, because in what that adds to it, because probably the most interesting way to look at a place, well, that might be an interesting way, but it's equally interesting to look at a place as an insider, So even when I travel, more often than not, I try to locate myself into not necessarily a community, but within certain parameters, and explore those parameters. And, you know, and where I photograph people a lot, you know, there's a lot of human contact that's made, so, you know, come as an outsider, but by the time I leave, you know, there's a familiarity granted, and, you know, but yeah, I don't think you have to. Traveling's not necessarily part of it. It is part of it, but, you know, you find ways around that if you couldn't travel, you know. No, I'm not entirely drawn to people.
No?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I am. Why do I photograph people? I don't know. See, I don't know how to answer that. You know, I mean, I do know how to answer that, but like there's too many answers for it. I suppose initially I was drawn to them because, well, let me say, I guess I'll put it this way, Siobhan. When I started out taking pictures, I didn't photograph people. I photographed, but you know, I photographed whatever. You know, I was around here, so I photographed barns. I photographed the landscape, and I don't think I necessarily did it well, but that's what I did. And you know, after about a year of taking pictures, I took one picture of a person that I thought was really great. It conveyed a sense of, you know, there was mystery there, like it was, you know, I had photographed friends and stuff, but none of it resounded. It didn't strike a point. And anyway, there was this one photograph, but that, you know, opened up, and I don't know, excited me about the possibility of photographing, you know, individuals. And soon afterwards, I remember being in Toronto and seeing this guy in the street who I had seen a year before in Toronto, who, you know, who actually kind of, a year before, it kind of creeped me out. He was following me around in the store, talking into his phone, and these dark shades on, and a briefcase. And anyway, and I saw him the following year, and I wanted to photograph him. And I couldn't, you know, I didn't know how to, you know, to cross that barrier where you approach a stranger to photograph them. But so I lifted my camera up to photograph him from a safe distance, and feeling that it was violating something, I didn't know when to press the trigger. And in this whole process, he looked at me different times. Each time I put the camera down, you know, and I had to raise it back up and put it down, and you know, and I took a couple of pictures, and they were crappy pictures, you know, because I didn't, you know, I didn't take that extra step to approach this person that I was drawn to in some way or another. And there was many, you know, there were probably a couple of years with pictures like that, you know, on occasion. But through it all, it told me that, you know, I didn't want to be necessarily taking pictures of barns. I wanted to be photographing people, and specifically in some cases strangers, you know. And maybe in photographing strangers, it was a desire to find that level of trust between myself and somebody, two people who don't know one another, who have no real reason to say yes to being photographed, who don't know why I want to photograph them. And in the early years, I didn't necessarily know. I was just drawn, and finding myself in places where it's not home, it becomes a way of, you know, pushing yourself out of your own kind of aloneness in a place and drawing yourself towards individuals. So anyway, people are, you know, yeah, people are interesting to photograph, or they can be. I guess I go to the States not because of for cultural similarities or differences, or how American culture, you know, is invasive or whatever, but because I like the charge of the States. I find America sexy, and I find it, you know, kind of thrilling. You know, I feel on edge there in a way that I never feel in Canada, and you know, there's a certain danger in the States that I like, and I mean, I go there. That's one of the reasons I go. I go because it's close. I can drive there. I can drive there in the winter and not have to photograph in snow. And I go there because I like palm trees. I like the way palm trees look in pictures. And you know, I go there because I have friends there. I go there because I like the way tans look in pictures. And but mostly because I find there's just something I go there obviously, probably. I was initially probably drawn because a lot of the photographs or photographers I was drawn to were American photographers, and you know, and I guess I was bitten by that sense of the openness of the American road, and you know, and that tradition, that rich tradition that came out of that, and but ultimately, I like the sort of feeling of danger in the States, in the alertness that grants you. You know, I feel I feel less lazy. My eye feels less lazy when I'm in the States, when I have to be on one level watching my back in some places, and it keeps you very alert to your surroundings and kind of in a constant buzz state, you know. And I love it there. It's an exciting country. I feel it's kind of ongoing. It's, you know, I wish I worked in projects more, and I'm starting to, but because I think it's you get to a point where you realize it's crazy not to, and you know. But I've always just seen it as an ongoing, not even a series, but just an ongoing relationship that I'm trying to have with the world that I live in, and you know. So I have a hard time ever saying anything's finished. Nothing really ever is, and I guess, you know, I just never really saw it as art in a way. And if it was seen as that, it came about, I don't know. I never got involved with photo to make art. I got, you know, more to, yeah. Maybe it was just a way to not get a job and to live a, you know, to live a fiddle-footed lifestyle. So, as I play with my foot. And yeah, I'm starting to work in series a little better. I guess the interesting thing is, never having really worked in series, you know, and there's been, and I can see the draw to a series and the you know, in the sense of a completion that the series gives you. But you know, I guess I'm interested in the ways that photographs can work with each other, can relate to each other when they're not specifically about one thing or the same thing, or geographically located in the same place, and you know, like, you know, how does a picture of, you know, how does a picture of a tree make sense next to a picture of, you know, a woman and her dog or something, you know, the relationships that are made through photographs, and that seem to be speaking of different things. So, and you know, the thing you realize, when series do sort of arrive, you realize that, you know, you just realize that you have there's certain trends in your work towards certain things, and work can, you know, I think I like the idea of how work taken from a large body of work can be broken down into series rather than working within a series particularly, you know. But that's starting to change. I'm working on a landscape series right now, and it's exciting, a series, you know, and knowing that within in a month of doing it, it'll be done, and I can rid myself of it, you know. So, yeah. One photographer whose work I love and continue to love is Lee Friedlander, and there's something chaotic about his work in the sense that you get the sense that he's photographed everything, you know, or he does photograph everything, but he's great because there are all these different things going on in his photographs, and it all feels like his work, you know. And at the same time, he works in series, you know, and in his American Monument work, you know, there's a quote where he said, like, you know, the thing he understood about working in that as a series was, as he would be in these towns looking for these monuments, and the book is ultimately of these monuments, what was interesting was not just photographing the monuments, but all the things he had an excuse to photograph on the way in the search for these monuments. So, and I guess with series, like, and I'm starting to realize, by even, you know, seeking out certain ideas or following them through, and, you know, it's not, you know, it's all those things that happen in between and after and around, you know, doing something kind of specific that's equally as interesting. So,
Yeah.
well, I don't know if I am drawn to celebrity. I'm drawing, yeah, I don't know. Well, I think with some of this work that what interests me more is, well, yeah, there is the notion of celebrity or recognizable, you know, the recognizable imagery of it, but is kind of, you know, I don't know if I'm trying to make a comment on celebrity culture so much. I'm trying to make pictures, and I think I've always felt that photographs present fictions. They don't really tell the truth, and I guess what sort of maybe has drawn me to some of these pictures or interests me in them is ultimately I think that once anybody's photographed, it's no longer representative of them. It's a photograph. It's a fiction. It's a half truth, a half lie, and you know, even a picture of a real person, you know, a picture of, you know, say a real celebrity, it's not them. It ceases to be them. But that being said, I think that, you know, once you reduce something to a two-dimensional space, well, when I look here, I guess I think, you know, that picture of Audrey Hepburn, it's a picture of Audrey Hepburn, but it's still a picture of Audrey Hepburn, or the picture of, you know, whoever. And so I think, you know, I'm, you know, maybe it's not celebrity I'm drawn to as much as the idea of the real, and showing how, maybe trying in some ways to show how photographs can play with that idea of the real, you know. And in the Samuel Jackson picture where you have the statue that looks and feels completely like a real human being, and the woman, the real person in it, feels less like a real human being because she's distorted by a function of the camera, you know. And yeah, I don't know. Celebrity, I don't know how I feel about celebrity. Yeah. No, it's called, I can't remember the title. It's called Donald Duck.
Are you
I'm trying to think what it's called. It's called, like, you know, it's called Donald Duck. On the screen or in a picture is still Donald Duck. But, I don't know, at home with Daisy, I can't remember the long title, but while Donald Duck at home with Daisy is the same old Donald but a different duck. That's what it's called. Something like that. Or iconography for short. You know. And, but I think I'm going to have to go with the Donald Duck thing. Maybe. And it's sort of called that because the picture that prompted going somewhere with this was a picture of Donald Duck. No, it was Donald Duck. It was a picture of him at the beach. So it's like, Donald Duck at the beach. I can't remember. It's a good title, though. And yeah, I guess it's dealing with representations of images that are iconic. I mean, the Donald Duck picture is kind of key to it for me. The picture that's probably most key for it, and it purposely takes it away from celebrity, is a picture of a kite that's a bald eagle kite that feels incredibly like a real eagle, you know, and again, it sort of distorts that. Yeah, so I don't know if iconography is the title. It's just something, you know. It's a title insofar as that it's something that you put in your head that allows you, while you're taking pictures of other things, to remind yourself that you also have this other interest that you go back to, and you know, it's a reminder that, oh yeah, while I'm doing this, I better, you know, there's Marilyn Monroe over there, I better take a picture, you know. It's like sometimes you only think about them afterwards. Like when I look at that picture, you know, I think that guy looks like Wyclef Jean from the Fugees, and then his head's attached to his girlfriend's body. But I don't think I was thinking that at the moment. I was probably thinking what CD I was going to buy once I got out of that building or something. I was thinking what I was going to have for lunch. You get into a mode, like, I don't know, you know. Yeah, you think a lot. I don't know, like, you don't think about specific things. I don't think. I don't think there's anything disposable about Elvis Presley or Bridget Bardot. You know, I think Elvis, you know, I just think my esteem for Elvis Presley is just too much. So in photographing Elvis or something, it's not with, you know, there's no kitsch on my part. There's no, you know, I take the business of taking a picture of Elvis Presley very seriously, you know, and you know, to me, Elvis Presley represents something so mysterious and so great about actually American culture. Like, he represents something, you know, that I can't even put my finger on. And Bardot similarly, you know, in terms of just, you know, and well, okay. I liked, you know, for instance, you pointed out in the catalog, and this is something, well, I noticed it, but I forgot to, you know, I didn't pay that much attention, but above the Elvis one, there's the sign, "Everything Must Go." And you see it as being, you know, referencing the sort of disposability of culture, of, you know, popular culture. And I agree, totally. But, you know, I think, but I'd also like to read that sign as being something beyond celebrity culture, and, you know, and it wasn't something maybe well, for instance, the picture hanging next to it of Marilyn Monroe, you know, and obviously they work together because they're both these pictures, paintings, these, or somebody else's artistic rendition of these huge icons, but they mirror each other in different ways. They're looking at, you know, sort of, they're at the opposite ends of the photographs, and in each case you have, one case you have the ocean behind them, in the other case you have the word ocean. And it wasn't, and there's the crosses in the Monroe, which are perfect in relation to her because, you know, she's so mythologized in death. And, but, you know, that maybe the everything must go is where everything's going. Even photographs, we are, right? Advice to young photographers, good advice, I would say, like, just work your ass off and, you know, and just know you can do it. And don't take no for an answer, and just do it the way you need to do it. Find your voice, and, you know, recognize that there's certain, you know, certain compromises you have to make to do what you need to do. And, you know, if it means working like a terrible job to have the weekends to pursue photo, like, it's worth it. Like, find anything to, you know, to make it possible. In any situation, like, if all of a sudden you're a stay-at-home dad or mom, like, photograph your kids, like, just, and do it well. Work hard, do it well.